When it comes to the legends and tales throughout our history, there are some uncanny coincidences. These coincidences are what led to the work of Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, and George Howard's Comet Research Group. Their work has shown evidence of the devastation left on the land from huge floods that affected most of the world during the time we now associate with Noah's flood. The Younger Dryas has turned out to be the last great cataclysm to cause havoc on the human race. But what of the other cataclysms depicted from the same people? There are commonalities between oral and written historical accounts that repeat themselves all over the world. This series came to life when diving into the stories of the Hopi and their comparison with the depictions from the Aztecs, Australian Aboriginals, and those in Genesis. Even though these stories were looked at before and opinions have been formed, I believe another look is warranted, and since these tales of the last recounted cataclysm have turned out to be more fact than fiction, then why would we not take interest in the older stories? So how do we begin unfolding these mysteries? When it comes to the legends and myths of our history, we often look at stories of creation as being from the same time, the beginning of our world and our universe. But not all are of this type of beginning. There are clues left to us which speak of other cataclysms occurring before these so-called creations. For instance, a transition period from a stable earth to an unstable one, in which what came was a different place than the one before. Such as Adam and Eve being forced to leave Eden in Genesis, and the Hopi being given a world which was not as beautiful as the last. They also speak of at least 4 major events which changed the face of the planet. Question is, when and where did these take place? The only way to determine that is to start with the one we know the most about, and that's the last great flood. Noah's flood lines up with the Aztecs' 4th son, where one god was chosen to be the sun and was struck down by 2 others. When she fell, it is said that the sky opened up and the rains flooded the earth. It also matches up with the Hopi's tale of the end of their 3rd world. Yet, if you move back through the timeline, some have gaps. These gaps are the reason used by some to discount the connections. But the gaps do make sense. Not everyone on the planet would have experienced the same fallout. In fact, there would have been people who may not have experienced anything at all, while the rest of the world was engulfed in turmoil. We know that our ancestors circumnavigated the globe, and while their ancestors may have been near another culture during one cataclysm, the possibility that they had since moved to another location is evident in these stories. So although we may not be able to use these tales to locate where specific people were on the planet when these events occurred, we still should be able to sort out which cultures were in close enough proximity to one another during certain events, and which were not. Among the stories, our ancestors speak about a time when the earth had more than one sun, and a mission was taken to destroy one. In their adventure, arrows were fired, which turned one of those suns into our moon. This caused the inhabitants of this story to experience night for the first time, and introduced unique daily and yearly cycles that differ from our own. As with any legend, these may be referring to cosmic events in which gods and not man were responsible. But nonetheless, Something happened which was on a large enough scale to be recorded all over the world and handed down to us today. Another question that has arisen from this research is this one. Can we determine how far back in time people existed from these tales? The answer to that is quite interesting, and one which may have more merit than some believe. The Aztecs tell of a world before humans were the dominant species. They speak about a world of giants. In Genesis, the mention of giants comes to us from Enoch. We already know about Neanderthals and Denisovans. So which species walked alongside humans that were commanding enough to warrant our respect through such a grand mention? One hint that these stories give us is in the gods. The gods take on all kinds of roles in these tales. Some are stars or planets, some are people or animals, while others are effects like weather and natural disasters, or functions, such as the pole's effects on our planet. So when we hear about how a god raged through the lands and decimated the people because of their sin, replacing that god with their attribute brings the story into a different light. Another connection comes from this same story, the wind. In the Hopi Four Worlds, the last thing that happened before the god Sotinang created Spider-Grandmother was the wind. In Genesis, the last thing mentioned before the creation of the world before Adam and Eve was also the wind. In a Greek creation myth, it is mentioned, the only thing in this void was Nyx, a bird with black wings. With the wind she laid a golden egg, and for ages she sat upon this egg. So why is the air or wind important in these three stories? It's important because if you look into the Aztec tale of 5 sons, it mirrors both stories almost word for word. They said that a world existed before this, and this world was destroyed by hurricanes. Another important thing to consider is the Hopi story. The first thing Spider-Grandmother did before she created the humans was creating the twins to guard the poles and stabilize the earth. So what on earth happened at this time? And what kind of cataclysm were these people witness to? Another link to these recreation tales is the telling of spirits needing to be awakened from their sleep. In an Australian Aboriginal myth, they say, there was a time when everything was still. All of the spirits of the earth were asleep. These stories of the sun rising for the first time and awakening people and animals from a deep sleep is also profound in many other legends. They are also told through other connections, such as popping up from holes, emerging from underground, and coming out of caves, as they enter a new world with a new sky above them. In an African Bushman creation myth, they say, people did not always live on the surface of the earth. At one time, people and animals lived underneath the earth. In all of these stories, there remains an interesting truth to our history. And as we dig deep into the realms of the minds of our ancestors, it is my hope that not only a stronger timeline can be established, but a better understanding of who we are and where we come from.